In the quiet town of Cedar Springs, Sheriff Grant Wilkes was a familiar face, respected and admired by the community he'd served for over a decade. Known for his steady resolve and calming presence, Grant had built a reputation as an upstanding citizen, someone people trusted to protect and lead them. But as respected as he was, those close to him knew that his life was far from perfect. His wife, Marlene Wilkes, was the center of many rumors in Cedar Springs. Once a vibrant, social woman, Marlene had gradually become reclusive and defensive, often on edge. Those who remembered her before her marriage to Grant would sometimes shake their heads, muttering about how marriage and life's trials had hardened her. Grant and Marlene's marriage was no fairy tale. Despite maintaining appearances, whispers of tension between them spread throughout the town. Adding to the tension was Rosie Miller, an 18-year-old high school senior and daughter of a local farmer who had recently started interning at the sheriff's office. Bright and ambitious, Rosie had her sights set on becoming a police officer, hoping her internship with Sheriff Wilkes would give her a jumpstart into law enforcement. She admired Grant's authority and strength, often staying late to shadow him and help out around the office. Though people noticed the young woman's dedication, only a few suspected that her loyalty ran deeper. One of those few was Marlene. She had her suspicions about Rosie's interest in her husband, and those suspicions turned to rage when Rosie began showing signs of pregnancy. Whispers spread that the teenager was carrying Sheriff Wilkes' child, though neither Grant nor Rosie ever confirmed it. But that didn't matter to Marlene, whose jealousy and anger only grew as the rumors intensified. What the community didn't see behind the sheriff's office walls was the secret relationship that had developed between Grant and Rosie. What had started as friendly mentorship had slowly crossed into something darker. Something that Grant never planned for yet was too weak to resist. Rosie's wide-eyed admiration and his own faltering marriage created the perfect storm, leading him down a path he knew could ruin everything he'd worked for. But Grant, always the pragmatist, believed he could keep this secret hidden, confident that Rosie's silence would protect him. On the night of August 15th, everything changed. Marlene had been following Grant for weeks, determined to catch him in a lie, to uncover proof of what she'd suspected for months. That evening, she saw Rosie leaving the sheriff's office alone, her figure unmistakably rounded by her pregnancy. Filled with rage and betrayal, Marlene decided to confront the young woman on her way home. Needing to hear the truth straight from her, Marlene followed Rosie down the dark, winding road leading to the Miller family's farmhouse. When Rosie finally realized she was being followed, it was too late to avoid the confrontation. She pulled over, stepping out of her car as Marlene approached, her expression a mixture of fear and resignation. "Is it true?" Marlene's voice shook with a mixture of anger and despair. "Is it my husband's?" Rosie, cornered and frightened, struggled to find words that could diffuse the situation. But Marlene didn't need confirmation. She could see the truth in Rosie's face, and that was all it took for her fury to boil over. Marlene stood only inches away from Rosie, her fists clenched, breaths coming fast and shallow. The moon cast an eerie glow over the deserted road, illuminating Rosie's terrified face as she searched for a way to escape. But Marlene was blocking her path, a woman cornered and consumed by the raw hurt and jealousy tearing through her. "How could you?" Marlene spat, her voice trembling. "He's my husband, for God's sake. Did you think this would stay hidden forever?" Rosie swallowed, backing up slightly, her hand instinctively moving to her swollen belly. She tried to speak, to defend herself, but Marlene didn't give her a chance. To Marlene, there was no possible excuse, no apology that could undo the damage that had been done. In her mind, Rosie had stolen her life, her husband, her dignity, and now, standing on the empty road with nothing but the night as their witness, Marlene's rage took control. In one swift motion, Marlene lunged at Rosie. Her hands found Rosie's shoulders, shoving her back against the hood of the car. Rosie struggled, her pleas lost in the darkness as Marlene's fury grew stronger, every ounce of her pent-up betrayal pouring into her actions. Words failed her now. There was only the blinding need to make Rosie feel the pain she herself felt. Rosie tried to push Marlene off, her own survival instincts kicking in, but the older woman's grip was iron strong. Marlene struck Rosie across the face, a slap that echoed in the quiet night. Dazed, Rosie managed to pull away slightly, her hand reaching into her pocket for her phone. She fumbled, trying to dial for help, but Marlene saw the movement and slapped the phone from her hand, sending it skittering across the asphalt. "I loved him," Marlene said, almost in a whisper, her eyes wild. "I trusted him. And you ruined everything." The altercation grew fiercer, their movements desperate and fueled by primal emotions. Rosie fought back, trying to escape, her voice cracking as she begged Marlene to stop. But Marlene's jealousy had long since crossed into madness. She grabbed a heavy metal flashlight from her purse and swung it at Rosie, striking her with a force that sent Rosie reeling. Rosie cried out, stumbling, and Marlene took another swing, her strikes landing harder, each one fueled by months of pent-up betrayal. Moments later, Rosie lay crumpled on the ground, silent, her breathing shallow. Marlene stared at her, panting, the reality of what she'd done slowly dawning on her. She took a step back, her chest heaving, and gazed down at the still form of the girl who had taken everything from her. In the dark silence that followed, Marlene's hands began to tremble. The rage that had consumed her moments ago was dissipating, leaving only a hollow, sickening feeling in its wake. She looked down at Rosie, realization hitting her like a punch to the gut. This wasn't what she'd intended. She only wanted to scare her, to make her feel the fear she'd caused. But it was too late. Heart pounding, Marlene glanced around, panic beginning to set in. She didn't have much time. Anyone could come down this road at any moment, and if they saw her here with Rosie like this, there'd be no explaining it away. She quickly searched the area, making sure no one was around before she knelt down, checked for Rosie's pulse, and found it faint but still there. Desperately, Marlene thought of a plan. She couldn't risk anyone finding Rosie, couldn't risk her waking up and telling anyone what had happened. In a state of shock and survival instinct, Marlene dragged Rosie's limp form to the side of the road, hiding her in a small thicket just out of view. She scrambled back to the car, breathing heavily, hands shaking, and drove off into the night, leaving Rosie behind, alone and unconscious. The morning after the altercation, Cedar Springs woke to news that sent shockwaves through the town. Rosie Miller, the sheriff's young intern, had been found on the side of the road, barely alive. A passing truck driver had spotted her while driving before dawn, her body partially hidden by roadside brush. He'd immediately called 911, and within minutes, an ambulance had arrived, rushing her to the Cedar Springs General Hospital. By the time Sheriff Grant Wilkes was informed, Rosie was in surgery. The doctors worked urgently, treating her severe injuries, but they warned Grant and his team that the trauma Rosie had endured was extensive. She was fighting for her life. As Grant stood outside the operating room, dread gnawed at him. He knew he'd crossed lines with Rosie, and now his hidden sins had erupted in a way he couldn't ignore. He felt the eyes of his deputies on him, as if they, too, suspected there was more to his connection with the intern than he let on. But the sheriff wore his practiced mask of composure, making sure not to reveal any cracks. He didn't have to wait long before the investigation was underway. Detective Jenna Rhodes from the state's Major Crimes Unit arrived at Cedar Springs Sheriff's Office that afternoon. A tall woman in her 40s with a reputation for her sharp instincts and no-nonsense attitude, Detective Rhodes was quick to zero in on the circumstances surrounding Rosie's injuries. During her preliminary examination of the scene where Rosie was found, Rhodes observed evidence of a struggle. There were footprints, tire marks, and a discarded flashlight, a heavy-duty model that matched the blunt force injuries Rosie had sustained. Rhodes immediately ordered the flashlight to be taken in for fingerprint analysis, suspecting it to be a key piece of evidence. The investigation shifted to the sheriff's office, where Detective Rhodes questioned everyone who had seen Rosie the previous day. It didn't take long for whispers to start circulating among the deputies, some hinting at the sheriff's unusually close connection to Rosie. When Rhodes heard the rumors, she requested an interview with Grant Wilkes himself. Grant sat across from Detective Rhodes, his expression unreadable as she began her questioning. "Sheriff Wilkes, I'm sure you're aware of the rumors regarding your relationship with Miss Miller," Rhodes said bluntly, wasting no time on pleasantries. "Some say you were closer to her than just a mentor." Grant tensed, but held her gaze. "People like to gossip. I'm her mentor, nothing more. Rosie's ambitious and smart, and I was helping her get a foothold in law enforcement. That's all. Sheriff, the reason I'm asking is because it's clear that Rosie's injuries were no accident," Rhodes continued. "The way she was beaten, this was personal. We'll be examining all angles, including the possibility that someone connected to her at the sheriff's office might be involved." Grant swallowed hard. He knew his words would be scrutinized, twisted even, but he maintained his composure. "I'd like to help in any way I can, Detective Rhodes," he said, his voice steady. Rosie didn't deserve this. But Rhodes wasn't convinced. Her instincts told her there was more to the story, especially when Marlene's name surfaced as she reviewed Grant's file. Married for nearly 15 years, Grant and Marlene had been known to have their ups and downs. Nothing unusual, but Marlene's unpredictable temper was a well-known fact among those who frequented the sheriff's office. Meanwhile, Marlene herself was on edge. Every ring of the phone, every knock on the door, made her jump. She couldn't shake the feeling that the whole town was watching her, their eyes sharp and full of suspicion. After all, it didn't take long for rumors to spread in Cedar Springs, and she knew that her confrontation with Rosie would eventually surface. The flashlight was hers, after all, a fact that kept her awake at night, wondering if she'd left any traceable evidence in the heat of the moment. A few days later, Detective Rhodes received the results of the fingerprint analysis on the flashlight. There, plain as day, were Marlene Wilkes' fingerprints, and alongside them, faint smudges that matched Rosie's. It was the break Detective Rhodes had been waiting for, with the evidence pointing toward Marlene. She moved quickly to bring her in for questioning. Marlene's carefully constructed world was crumbling, and with every passing moment, the pressure mounted, pushing her closer to an inevitable confession. Detective Jenna Rhodes wasted no time after finding Marlene's fingerprints on the flashlight. She knew this was the key evidence she needed, and Marlene was summoned for questioning that evening. Sitting across from Rhodes in the stark interrogation room, Marlene's steely exterior began to crumble under the weight of her guilt and Rhodes' relentless questions. At first, Marlene deflected, denying any involvement in Rosie's attack. But Rhodes, methodical and patient, wore down her defenses, laying out every piece of evidence: the flashlight, the tire tracks, and finally, the damning fingerprints. When Rhodes pressed her, Marlene's facade shattered, and her anger and despair poured out. She confessed, recounting the night of the confrontation with Rosie, the jealousy that had driven her to madness, and the brutal assault that had left Rosie barely alive. Tears filled Marlene's eyes as she described her actions, realizing the enormity of the crime she'd committed. "I wanted her to feel what she did to me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "She destroyed my life. She took him from me." The words hung in the air, a painful admission that left both Rhodes and Marlene in silence. The confession was enough for Detective Rhodes to make the arrest. Grant Wilkes, meanwhile, faced his own reckoning. The investigation exposed his affair with Rosie, a betrayal that shattered his marriage and career. The community turned on him, the once respected sheriff now seen as the man who traded his integrity for a secret affair, sparking the violent tragedy that had unfolded. Rosie, against all odds, survived her injuries, but the trauma left her physically and emotionally scarred. She left Cedar Springs to escape the memories, carrying with her the burden of the affair and the violence it had sparked. The town itself would never be the same. The scandal left a permanent stain on Cedar Springs, a reminder of the secrets and lies that lay beneath its quiet surface. Marlene was sentenced to 20 years in prison for the assault. In her cell, she was left to reflect on the choices that had led her down this dark path. For her, the punishment was more than time served. It was a life defined by the bitterness of betrayal and the rage that had ultimately destroyed her.